Okay, I think we're live. Can you all hear me? If I don't hear from...
Just in time, Joe.
Yes. If I don't hear from anyone, screaming on the side of the screen, I think we are broadcasting on Facebook as well. So, good to see you all. I think we should just wait a few minutes just to get everyone on, because I think we're going to have a few people joining us as we sort of kick things off. Yeah, apparently we are live on Facebook. I just got confirmation, so good to roll. Joe, did you mute yourself or did I mute you?
No, I muted myself.
Okay, cool, because I sometimes, me and technology. Okay, cool. So, Carla, do you want to kick off just a little bit about MCC, and then I can jump into the question?
Yeah.
As we get everyone rolling.
Yeah, sure. So hi, everyone. Rosella and myself, we're the co-founders of MCC, Malta Creative Collective. For those who haven't joined this webinar before, just to give you a little intro of what Malta Creative Collective stands for. We're a network that's based in Malta, and we bring together collaboration between locally based designers and artists, so locally based creatives. We usually meet up once a month, either for a workshop or just for a drink or to discuss a new project. Due to COVID-19, we've had to stop that, not to let the network fall or go quiet. We jumped onto the webinar trend, and we've started doing these weekly webinars where we just discuss ideas or questions that are being brought up in these times. And what we want to do is just cultivate creativity and keep this community going, and just keeping our ideas flowing and discussing some fresh ideas and inspiration. And that's about it. So Rosella will let you know what today's webinar is all about, and then we will go on to 3 questions with 3 different creatives and leave some time for anyone listening in to ask questions or discuss any ideas.
Yeah, cool. So as Carla mentioned, we've invited 3 different creatives today from 3 differing industries to talk a little bit about the topic of resilience and creativity and the relationship between these two, and how they are impacted by difficult and unique times as the ones that we're going through. It was inspired a little bit by something which one of the creatives that joined us last week, Keit Bonnici from Lockdown Festival, he's one of the co-founders, he mentioned something really interesting and sort of raised this question within the group as to how the current situation is going to impact the creativity of individuals and brands as we go along, and sort of how perhaps having fewer or just different resources at hand will modify or enhance or change the creativity of makers and brands. So we sort of sat down and thought a little bit about that, and thought it would be a really interesting way of having that topic sort of discussed. And so we brought together, in no particular order, we have Julia, who's on the line from, well, now she's in Malta, but she's just come back from New Zealand and Australia, which she'll be sharing a little bit about her journey, and she's a chef. Then we have Eliza from Studio Nomad Interiors, who, well, they'll all introduce themselves as well when they kick off, but Eliza has an incredible story. She's basically had, she's been practicing from sort of LA and went over to Africa and was many years in Kenya before moving over to Malta to continue her practice. And then there is photographer and writer Joanna, who's joining us as well, all of us from little island of Malta. Joe is a photographer and writer who's contributed to the likes of the Washington Post and obviously the Times of Malta, but a few other publications and media portals. So it'll just be very interesting to see how, from these 3 different industries, each creative has tackled this topic of resourcefulness. So we're going to kick off with Eliza, and the first question will be for her. So as I mentioned earlier, Eliza, she's lived and worked in Los Angeles for many years, and then she moved her practice over to Kenya, which was undoubtedly a huge change, which tested her resilience and resourcefulness as both an interior designer and as a creative in general. Eliza, just looking back at that experience as a whole, what would you say were the 3 most valuable lessons that your time in Kenya taught you, which you are still applying to your practice today?
Hi, everyone. First of all, maybe I should start with a really brief background. So I grew up in many different countries because of my father's job. So basically, since I was a little kid, we changed countries every few years. Well, now it's been about 20 years ago. I moved to first Hawaii, where I started interior design. After a year, I was married at the time, and my husband got a job in Los Angeles, so I moved there. I graduated in interior architecture in Los Angeles, and then I got a job at Gensler, which is a very large architecture firm. So very corporate, super organized, lots of process and all this good stuff, which was something that we prepared for at university. And then after about 5 years, I moved to Kenya. And it was like a completely different world. I mean, it was exciting. It was always exciting for me, as this was my lifestyle growing up, to change places. But I think that Kenya was quite a very steep learning curve, because basically every rule of the game had to go out of the window. I have to say, first of all, that the place where I moved to in Kenya is a touristy place, but as in many developing countries, if people have been to, I don't know, Indonesia or Mexico or other places, the capital is really cosmopolitan. There's, it's just like a completely different world. It's much more similar to what we might be used to from an international standpoint. But where I was an amazingly beautiful place on the coast of Kenya. So you can imagine, like white beaches and crystal clear sea and so on. But there was one road, which basically led to all the hotels along the coast and the residences, which were a mix between people from Nairobi that had their summer homes and then some foreigners that bought homes there. And basically, that's it. Blackouts, even 3 times a day, really slow internet. So, things like, you build your website, you start from scratch, everything had to be readapted. And so one of the first things that I think, when I went there, I didn't go with a plan. It wasn't like, okay, let me just get up and move to Kenya. It happened that I had gotten divorced in the US. I hooked up with my new boyfriend. He wanted to move to Kenya and start something new. And I said, sure, why not? I've been moving around my whole life. Let's continue doing it. Sounds exciting. And I went there and then, it's like, okay, now what shall I do? So I think that the very first thing, especially when you are, in a new place and you're starting still with your baggage of knowledge, but afresh, it's to just sit back and observe and see how you can apply what you know to your new context. Because seriously, it's like, everything that I knew and the way that I knew how to work in Los Angeles with like reps serving you and calling you and giving you quotations and even the same day, and people with a very different mindset on, you know, professionalism and how they viewed us as professionals was completely out of the window. So that was like, how do I get myself known? How do people appreciate what I do? How do people not ask me for constant examples of my work for free? Just because you have to prove yourself, and because seeing images on a portfolio is not enough. And they say, oh, but you know, we show us some work that you've done in this place, and you have no work that you've done in that place, obviously. So it doesn't matter whether you were published on Interior Design magazine or you worked for a really large architecture firm. It's like all that goes out of the window, you know. So it's like a wave coming at you, and you just, you know, I must say I got depressed quite a number of times because there were really no rules of the game. And I thought interior design was something that, despite the fact that there were hotels, there were restaurants, there were spas that were coming up, so there was work that could have been done. But it was a question of, how do I meet these people? How do they know what I do if I haven't done anything here yet? You know, how does my corporate work translate to what is done here in Kenya, and, you know, the vernacular that was typical of the coast in Kenya, and so on. So, well, I started by being a tourist for quite a number of months and just going around and learning about the architecture and being really humble about everything, because clearly, you know, it wasn't like going in a shop and finding what you needed. Mombasa, which is the closest big town to where I used to live in Watamu, was about 2.5 hours away. So, you know, anything that you could think for a project had to be invented from scratch or adapted from what you could find from the street vendors, from materials that you could find readily available in the area. And, you know, what I discovered was an amazing array of craftsmanship that I obviously didn't use before in my work. And I started from there. And coincidentally, I also, you know, built my own house. So that helped a lot in understanding the building methods and how to use materials, and even how to deal with the two aspects. One was the client aspect, which, you know, oftentimes when you work abroad, there's a difference between, you know, there's all the people from different ethnic backgrounds. So people from South Asian backgrounds dealt with you in a certain way, expats dealt with you in a certain other way, Africans dealt with you in a different way altogether, you know. So there were all of these different nuances that you needed to understand. So there was the social aspect. And then working with the people that actually made the designs happen, because, you know, one thing is sending an email to someone, which obviously there did not happen. So you had to pick up your tuk-tuk and go and talk to the guy in person and explain it, and, you know, have drawings and, you know, make the person repeat to be sure that they understood what you said, not because of language, but maybe because you're trying to do something that's a bit different from what they're used to. And then the logistics of things. It's like when people, you know, in places like that tell you we're on the way. I once waited for 2 hours for this on the way to arrive. And that was because they were carrying a big slab of glass by hand across town. They stopped and had lunch in the meantime, and then 2 hours later they arrived. And I just was like, you know, it's like, what, you know, and then you can't call them back because they have no credit. So it's just like, seriously, I could write a book with the amount of things that had to be readapted. But I think that despite the hardship of, you know, at the beginning, it's obviously frustrating, because you feel like in the beginning you approach these things as in, you know it all, or you know what you've studied and what you've already practiced. And then all of a sudden you feel like, I really don't know much. I mean, because everything is going wrong. I mean, things are not arriving on time, they're not done the right way, and this and that and the other. And once you just sort of like drop everything and start just going with the flow, and you know, readjusting how long things take, and you know, there is just a learning process that you just have to say and think from the beginning. If this was, like, let's say in my case, a planned move, I would just say, you know what, it's going to take me a year, and in this 1 year I'm going to learn what there is to learn. So eventually I did learn what there was to learn, and it did work out. And I think that another lesson is, you know, get out there and you know, be friendly with people and try to become part of the community. So the usual means that we have of, you know, especially nowadays, social media versus emails or your Facebook page and so on. This was obviously a very particular case, not because it was backwards, but it was, you know, aside from this strip of developments, beyond that, it was really like rural Africa. So, you know, how could I reach the people that were the decision makers in the tourism industry, for example, or the people that owned houses but were living in Nairobi. And so, you know, once I was living there, and then I started joining, I don't know, the surfing club or meeting people at the supermarket, and you know, people start saying like, oh, wow, she speaks English, and let's talk to her. And, you know, then things just start to happen. And just by word of mouth, people see that this is what you do, and they start getting curious, and maybe they start calling you, and then they know someone else who's in Nairobi, receive an email from them. And so this is how things started happening. And, you know, I think that the learning process was really just go with the flow in my case, because I've learned so much from, first of all, I think that from the client side, I've learned to really keep my own integrity, because especially in my case, being so used to being flexible, because I've traveled so much, and, you know, when you move to a new country, since you're a kid, you learn to adapt. And one of my main mistakes was to be too adaptable. So then you start, you know, double guessing. It's like, well, they have a point, you know, I mean, if I can't show them something that I've done locally, then maybe I should, you know, give a really, really super good price, or, you know, do something for free, just as an example, and then people will get to know what I do. And, you know, soon enough, I started having, yes, people being interested, but I was working a lot, and I wasn't making any money. And it seems that, you know, in the end, when you work for free, people don't really appreciate the extra effort you're putting in.
Yeah,
so
totally.
This is something that then when I moved to Malta, I made sure that I wouldn't get in that same frame of mind. So I was like, I'd rather sit on the beach or stay at home on my sofa and do nothing. You know, but if I'm earning nothing, I'll do nothing. And if people want to hire me, this is my portfolio. Okay, I haven't done anything in Malta. If you like my style, or if you think that I have, you know, the background that can fit your agenda, then let's talk. If not, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Yeah, that fits in actually with something that we talked about at which you went to, I think, Eliza, on at one of our last actual physical meetups we did at Blitz in November, which talked about you know, giving value to your work and presenting in a certain way, and not sort of just giving out things for free. But I mean, going back a little bit to what you said about what you brought back to Malta from your experience in Kenya, about I liked a lot what you said about being humble. And I think, you know, we're all going through this very difficult and sort of uncertain moment in our history as humans. And I think, as you said, Eliza, not sort of going in with thinking, I know it all, I know exactly how this is going to, you know, pan out, so I'm going to make sure that I do X, Y, Z. I mean, no one knows how things are going to unfold, and being humble enough to appreciate that and to admit that, and also reflecting that in the work that you do, I think as a creative is really important. I don't know if anyone else on sort of around the table has anything to add to that before we move on to Julia's second question, or in general, just add anything to what Eliza said. No, we're all good. No, okay. Well, Eliza, did you have anything to add before we wrapped up this section and sort of, because I liked sort of as well what you mentioned about being resourceful with the materials you have at hand, and I think again that's very relevant to what we're going through at the moment.
But for my specific job, I came from a very cushy background in Los Angeles where everything was ready. So it was just like a matter of picking things that we liked and that were good for specific projects off a catalog. You didn't have to think about, is it going to work? Is it going to arrive on time? And, it's just selecting. Whereas when you're in a place where you basically have to invent and be creative with really very little, it really pushes you out of your comfort zone. So I think that these occasions in which we're a bit, either we sit back and we say like, okay, now what am I going to do with myself now and with my creative side? I think Kenya really has opened up my creativity and pushed me to explore things that then I ended up liking so much. I ended up liking so much seeing people build things from scratch or going out and looking at stuff and thinking like, ooh, that pan, I can turn it upside down and make it become, I don't know, a light fixture or, things like this. And then if I take it to the guy that is going to add, certain things to it, then it becomes a unique product. So this type of mindset has now, it's like, now this is who I am and how I design. So yeah, I think that, if you let go and you open your mind, you really just organically find things that come to you without you even looking for them. And, years later you go like, ooh, I think I got this from that place and I've learned it. So I think that's my biggest lesson.
It's more satisfying as well, I guess, when you realize that you've created something out of maybe the bare minimal or what's available, and not researching too much what's out there and what you can bring into your design work, but really working with what is there. I mean, at the moment, we can apply that to so many things that we're doing at home. We really have to use what we've got to create things, whether it's a design project or just a meal, because maybe you don't want to run out to the grocer or whatever. It's
I was just about to say,
yeah,
it ties in with many things, I think, and obviously I'm thinking about food, but it might be our new normal, that we have to think much more locally than we did in the past. And suddenly, whether it's fruit and vegetables from abroad or materials that you can only find locally, this might be the way we need to start thinking. So it's interesting. It does, I think, connect with quite a few sort of different topics, different industries.
I also just want to comment on what you said about finding your own signature style and like being confident about it. I think that nowadays we get so much information and so much inspiration and like different styles which all look amazing, and you want to do everything. I think it's really like something special to find what you feel strongly about as a style and like believe in it and stick to it. So I think it's really great to possess that quality in your and that confidence in your work.
Actually, Jo, that puts up a really interesting point, because I think it's exactly in these kinds of moments where we are faced, with quite a difficult situation, where it emerges even clearer exactly what our signature style is, because we're being forced to kind of sit there and reflect what it is that we do really well, and having to choose the materials that we use to express that. And, whereas before it was very easy because everything was very sort of accessible, in times like these where things are a little bit less so, or very different, even turning sort of organizing a photo shoot, for example, I'm thinking for Carla and her range of you know, resort wear, you know, organizing a photo shoot is going to be very, very different. And it's interesting. I've seen some photographers, for example, taking some very interesting approaches. For example, taking shots from balconies and you know, from a distance, maintaining the kind of 1 meter or whatever it is rule of taking shots, and then, you know, photoshopping it or editing it so it looks like it's been done in a studio and all of that. So these are things which ordinarily wouldn't obviously happened. But
there was a photo shoot on the New York Times which a photographer did through Zoom. So like she worked with the subjects to like find the nice light in their house, and
really,
you know, and they look really, I mean, they're all taken on webcam, but they look really professional.
Really?
Yeah, so I like that, how like everyone is adapting to a scenario, you know, and like you're finding a way even if there isn't one. So that's really interesting.
Totally. I think that leads on actually really well to the next question. Carla, do you want to take the lead on that? The next question for Julia.
So next we have Julia, who's still in quarantine after just rushing back from New Zealand. So Julia, you've been traveling Australia and New Zealand for the past few months, and I'm guessing your trip would have lasted a little longer if you didn't have to rush back home. Being there, how did you sort of applying your creative cooking skills in entirely novel settings, and how did these radically different surroundings change or affect your craft now that you're home, and what are you going to bring back to the table here in Malta?
Well, firstly, hello everybody, and thanks Carla and Rosella for having me be involved in this conversation. So to start off with, I just wanted to explain how for me cooking has always been something more than just the sort of practical side of things, you know, coming up with recipes or preparing food. I've always been equally as intrigued by the kind of relationship we have with food, the different relationships we have, whether from like a social point or culturally, you know, the way it sort of determines our views on health and nutrition, and also connecting it with nature as well, giving us, you know, an understanding of where our food comes from, you know, like the whole farm to table concept and all of that. So as a creative, for me, it's, you know, I'm drawn to the technical side of things, but it's also, I feel like there's a lot of potential storytelling that can be applied to it when you think of it from a more holistic point of view. And I just touch on this because this is where I kind of wanted to take my learning and my craft, so to speak, along with me on my travels. This was sort of my direction at the time. So yeah, exactly. Dave and I, my partner and I, we decided to head over to Sydney about 6 months ago, if not more. And for those of you who haven't been before, it's an incredible city. The food culture there is extremely exciting for me. You know, as a chef, somebody who appreciates good food, it was quite an incredible experience. We did our fair share of frying as much as we could. Given its geographic location, it's a real melting pot of different cultures and different ethnicities, and this was very sort of reflective in the food scene, making it a really exciting place to be as a cook. Something that kind of stood out to me from the beginning was that I saw from the restaurant industry that there was this very strong connection with this farm to table concept that I particularly appreciated. I felt like the restaurants were very supportive of the local industries in that way, through their communications. And I really felt like, as a customer, as an outsider, I really saw that there was this desire to share this information and bring the customer in on that side of the process as well, you know, which I feel really connects people, locals, even foreigners like myself, to the land. And I thought that was very particularly strong. But not just with the restaurant. As a customer, as an outsider, I really, but also, sorry, I just heard myself.
That was my fault because I opened the Facebook Live.
So yeah, this wasn't just evident, I felt, in the restaurant scene, but also in terms of other aspects of food retail. In fact, I had first-hand experience because I spent a bit of time working with some really good family friends who own a very successful business there called Scoop. And they've got a few shops now in Australia and outside as well. And basically it's a Whole Foods, a bulk Whole Foods store. And they have zero policy for single-use plastic. So the idea is that you can get your own glass container from the shop, or you can bring your own and refill with a whole variety of whole foods there. And that was a really interesting experience for me as a chef. I think it was, you know, it gave me the opportunity to understand a bit more about where specific products came from, particularly over there in Australia. You know, I could see what they were managing to get locally, which they made a big effort to do, and then what they couldn't and what they had to get elsewhere, especially, you know, particularly given changes in the climate or seasons. In Australia, they have been experiencing very bad drought, so that was obviously something that affected things greatly. But also it was particularly interesting because of the nature of the sort of transparency of the concept. It kind of encouraged consumers to really engage with the staff and to sort of inquire about where certain products came from and where they were sourced, whether it was a local product or an organic product, all of these kind of questions. And I think it was, you know, I sort of got to observe this whole customer experience that I think has been completely lost in the supermarket, you know, in terms of that kind of engagement. It's non-existent. And again, I got to see, particularly, you know, with the locals there was this strong support of Australia-made products, of locally sourced products, and people would often, when given the choice, they would choose to even to spend a little bit more on something they knew that was sourced locally. So I felt that was really impressive and something that has kind of, you know, stayed with me, and I think can be applied very well. And I think it also, you know, allowed customers to be a lot more sensitive to the understanding of the climate situation affecting the availability of food. As I think the whole world was aware, Australia was affected really badly this year with bushfires. And, you know, it was the worst they've ever had, particularly because of the drought. And not only did this mean there was a horrible loss of wildlife and of natural habitat, but also it really affected the supply of certain products that would have originally been sourced locally. So yeah, I felt, you know, this was a pretty overwhelming and kind of shocking experience to witness so closely as we did. And I think, like many people, it left me feeling, you know, helpless and very frustrated and very quick to want to kind of find someone to blame, you know, and it's always the government. And I think there's definitely place for that. But after some time, I think the sort of reflection on this was that actually what is more sort of empowering is to sort of reflect on it personally and think, what can I do? What is the power that I have as a consumer to make, better sort of consumer decisions, and to live more closely to the sort of principles that I might have to want to live a bit more sustainably, and all of this. And so moving from that, I suppose, to give you an idea of our sort of states of mind, Dave and I felt like we kind of needed to shake up our lives a little bit, maybe more extreme than we might have otherwise. And that's when we planned our trip to New Zealand, which we had wanted to do. We had wanted to do some trekking in New Zealand for a while, but we didn't really know when we would be able to do it. And after the whole situation with the fires, we were, really desperate to kind of get out of the city, and, we wanted to like sell all our stuff, go to New Zealand, do this crazy long trek, and we just felt the need to sort of ditch all of our like material sort of possessions and immerse ourselves in nature, which is sort of what, to an extent, what we ended up doing. And we decided to do a through hike, which is basically when you want to get from one point to the next on foot. So trekking every single day, only kind of going in and out of civilization when you need to restock your food supply. Otherwise we were completely cut off, no service, pretty much no human contact either, which was actually quite welcome. And
COVID,
what was that?
No wonder you look so refreshed, Julia.
I know. We've kind of been in isolation for a lot longer than just these 2 weeks.
Exactly.
But that's what was so interesting, actually, to go from that experience so quickly shifted into this. Mm-hmm. Our trip was actually cut short in half. We were going to do 6 weeks. We only ended up doing 3 because we had to quickly rush back here. But it was such a weird thing. We were like, there we were trekking in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, in like the wilderness. And we had totally simplified our lives down. We were eating very basic rations of food. We had no creature comforts whatsoever. So it was all about resourcefulness. It was all about the bare necessities, because all we were thinking was like, where's the next river so we can get our water? When, how far till the next hut where we're going to sleep, or do we have to pitch our tent? And then we had a very simple meal in the evening, and so much oatmeal, so much porridge. I can't look at porridge again. But what it sort of made me realize was that doing a sort of practice like this, like I felt it was, it just makes you realize how little we really need, and how much we've been led to believe that we think we need, and the difference between those two is so great. And I think that's why we have this huge problem today of waste. And that's something that's been coming up for me quite a lot, this problem that I really feel kind of compelled to delve deeper into, and something I really want to, as a chef, as an individual, kind of try to tackle and to help people tackle this issue of food waste. Mm-hmm. And I think it's amazing that we're sort of in this situation now. And I think it was amazing that I had gone through that experience before, because it really brought this to my attention. We need so little to be satisfied. And I think particularly spending so much time in nature at the same time, I felt so fulfilled by that experience that I wasn't bothered by how little I was eating or how uninteresting it was to prepare it, because the day was so fulfilling, and that also made me think, I wonder whether that's a bit of an issue that we have, particularly in Malta, where we don't have that much access to nature. I think that's a problem a lot of people struggle with. And maybe that's why we tend to overconsume so much, whether it's food or other things. I've probably totally gone over my time, but I've probably not answered the question.
Well, no, Julia, but maybe just very briefly in like a nutshell, because I know you touched upon it before when we had a pre-webinar chat about sort of where you're taking what you've learned from the Australia and New Zealand experience and bringing it to the table here in Malta. Just maybe very briefly outline where you're thinking of kind of applying this now to the context that we're in, considering that we're also in pandemic times.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there were a few takeaways. One that I didn't mention, and one that that I'm currently trying to work on, is something that I saw in the supermarkets in Australia. Was this concept of having an imperfect section in the fruit and vegetable section of the supermarket, which is super simple, but I think it's kind of genius at the same time, where they, for a discounted price, they're selling the imperfect fruit and vegetables, meaning that they're kind of deformed in some way, or they have some weird black spot or whatever, perfectly edible, perfectly fine, but imperfect in that usually the supermarket themselves would actually reject them, because they just know that us as customers don't go for the stuff, slightly discolored banana or whatever it is. And I think now more than ever, where we're trying to be a bit more resourceful, we probably have slightly tighter budgets, because a lot of people don't know when their next paycheck is going to come and all of that. It really kind of kills two birds with one stone, to offer something at a discounted price for the supermarket to tackle an issue of waste that they're experiencing themselves, and for people to sort of be a bit more economical with their food spendings. So that's definitely something I think we can, I'd love to see happening here in Malta, and I'm currently trying to contact a few different organizations, and I would love to get into the supermarkets, but we'll have to see. So yeah, I mean, I'm only just kind of piecing it all together, I suppose. So I really have a lot of ideas in that sense, and most of it is about tackling food waste. Another quick note, because I think it'll give a lot of people something to think about, is that doing my research in the past couple of days, I came across an article of statistics that Malta is the second most wasteful country in the EU in terms of household waste. Something like 700 kilos, if I'm not mistaken, per person per year. And 50% of that is food waste. So that's not all to say like we've, stuff that we haven't eaten. It's also food scraps and stuff, but a lot of that will be stuff that's simply kind of gone bad, like how often do you clean out your fridge and you're like, oh, sort of soggy cucumber or whatever it is. So for me as a chef, that's where I see a lot of potential, giving people the tools and the inspiration to kind of make their food go further, as well as kind of reaching out to supermarkets and the sort of suppliers to do their bit as well. I think both of those things have to go hand in hand.
Very interesting. I'm shocked by the statistic.
I have so much to say about it. I could go on forever. But
wow, let's hope that next time we speak, Julia, you'll tell us that we become the last on that list and not the second. So
yes, I know. I was so shocked when I saw that. As usual, not so good in terms of the statistics, but it was, I think it was last year, the article, if I'm not mistaken. So it's pretty recent. But, I think it kind of probably applies across the board, this issue of not being conscious enough about the amount, we love to sort of, have this frenzy when we're in the supermarket of getting all this exotic stuff and whatever, and then how much of it ends up going to waste. And as I mentioned when we were talking about Eliza's, in the questions afterwards, I think we really are going to have to start thinking a lot more locally in terms of getting our ingredients and being a lot more resourceful, and also kind of maybe spending a bit more on products that have a longer shelf life, like dry grains, dry pulses and things like that. And as a chef, I think that's how we can maybe help people as well, sort of giving people a few more ideas on how to make those kind of things go a bit further and be a bit more appealing. They're not already.
Did anyone have any questions? Or, I mean, there's a whole thing, like, we could spend hours on this conversation. It's a very, I think, very relevant topic. But if anyone else has anything to add very briefly, whether from people listening in or from everyone else around the table. But yeah, I agree with you, Julia. I think there is a lot to be said about resourcefulness in food, and how it's partly obviously a chef's responsibility in a way to educate consumers, but also suppliers to supermarkets to actually start shifting the conversation. And now is, I think, you know, where everyone is so focused on getting the food because everyone's worried that they're not going to get any, if anything's cut off in terms of supply chain, something like Malta is going to be one of the first countries to have biggest issues because so much of it is imported. So this shift towards starting to look local, even within an industry as the food industry and as a creative industry, as a chef, is such a vital conversation to have. Okay, I think we'll wrap up with this section and move on to Joe's segment. So third question and last question of this evening. So, well, we approached Joe because we've been kind of seeing a really interesting sort of side project that she's been posting on Instagram about. So this very unique Polaroid project, which is very much a reflection of how the landscape has affected her methods as a photographer and as a creative. So Joe, the question for you is, how has this shift impacted your perception of photography as a medium for your creativity? And you know, what does resourcefulness mean to you during a time which appears, you know, very limiting for us all as individuals, but especially as a creative and as a photographer, in your case?
So I form part of a woman collective, which is made up of about, I think it's like 1,000 female photographers around the world. And the immediate reaction from that group to COVID-19, having photographers spread worldwide, was someone came up with the idea of, let's create a global project. Like, let's have all women photographers around the world document their lives wherever they are in the world, and create this, you know, like collective documentation. And all of a sudden, I started seeing on this group pictures from everywhere. And I was also thinking, at that time, I was seeing a lot of new photographers, and I was looking at their work, and I was interested in like really moving away from photos that I usually take with a digital camera and just having fun and experimenting a bit. So everything kind of came together. So basically there was this project in the back where we were being, well, not really encouraged, you know, it was out of our own free will if we wanted to do it or not, to document our lives. And also because there were so many people doing it, I was thinking, okay, let me try and find something different that I can do, which, you know, like is a bit challenging kind of for me, and just to, you know, push what I'm used to kind of. And I borrowed my sister's Polaroid camera, and at that time Scan was still delivering Polaroid things because I had to buy a few. And I just started documenting something that I was noticing happening, that random objects which I hadn't seen before started appearing around my house. So it started with, like, you know, a face mask, which my mother had given to me because before the whole coronavirus thing happened, I was in Africa also, actually, for a few weeks. And before I went there, my mother came into my room and she's like, take the mask, take the coronavirus mask. And I was like, no, like, I'm not going to need it. In fact, Africa was like the last place to be hit. But the day I came back was like the day when everything started to get shut down. And I was like, that's really ironic because, you you know, like I left here saying this isn't going to happen in Malta, and I came back to like having to resort to it. And then I just noticed other things, you know, up here that were slightly out of the norm. Like my mother started knitting, so I took a photo of her knitting project. I didn't even know she knows how to knit. You know, I found a rosary bead. My father had started saying the rosary. So it was a lot of these random objects. And as the time, now it's been about a month and a half or a month and a bit. And as time progressed, it's really interesting because I'm trying to pay attention not only to objects, but to like just differences. So for example, family lunches have become longer and they go into dessert. So like try to find a way to portray that, or like this paranoia, like so you're going to get the infection inside the house. So for example, we have to take off our shoes when we get in the house. So like find a way to show that. So it's become more of like a documentation, a very simple documentation really, of all these small changes. And for some reason, like, you know, it's easy. It doesn't require much effort for me to do. It's something I don't have to stress out about too much. It's something that's in my own home. So it's been something that's established like a natural rhythm for me to do. Yeah, so that's the project. I mean, I don't have any big plans for it. It's just part of my weekly routine now.
It's great.
When we talked a little bit earlier this week, you mentioned something about how this shift in dynamics generally has also impacted the way that you pitch your work to publications and media platforms. Do you perhaps want to give us a little bit of an insight into how that has impacted, or how the situation has impacted that side of your creativity as a writer and as a photographer?
I just think, you know, it's very difficult to pitch a story to to a foreign publication, because usually there has to be something interesting about it. Otherwise, they're not really going to care. You know, like I said, why should global readers care about an issue? It has to be something. So I think this coronavirus situation is the very first time ever that like it's a situation which everyone is relating to in one way or another. So it's a global issue. It's so all of a sudden, I think photographers are photojournalists are in like full documentation mode of whatever's happening in their area, because they have a new narrative somehow to tell, to the bigger story of coronavirus. And how my mind works is I'm always trying to see a situation from a local perspective, a Malta angle, and also how it would be relevant. I think it's just because it's, okay, what's interesting about what's happening here? Why is it important? And who can I pitch it to? I mean, pitching is like 99.99999% of the time unsuccessful. Like you'll be very lucky if you get something. Everyone. But it's been fun because I think it keeps me active and coming up with ideas, and just like keeping up the creativity within a time where, as you said before, it appears to be limited. But I also told you how for me this time has been really resourceful because of the fact that we're moving at a bit of a slower pace to usual, and I feel that during a day we'll have more space and more time to do things, or to just be and do nothing. And so in that sense, it's really helped me just like catch up with things that I was putting on the shelf for a long time, like sorting out files and all these boring things that you say I'll do when I have time, and now it's like you have no excuse. So I think, as we were discussing last time, I think the biggest resource that everyone has at the moment is more time. And I don't think it needs to be filled in some extravagant way. I think it should just be filled in however you feel is useful for you.
I agree with that. I think that's a really, really, really good point. I think, and we talked about this very briefly in perhaps one of the last webinars.
Yeah.
We think we need to fill all this time, extra time that we've gained with adding more stuff to our to-do list, or you know, and you see everyone doing, I don't know, these online yoga lessons or workouts, and you know, everyone's baking 48 million muffins a day, and no reference to anyone on this call, but in general, you just think, oh wow, you know, everyone's getting so everyone's getting so much done and baking bread, and then
I know, so much bread.
and you're like, I'm sit here and not do anything for the 4 hours of my afternoon. I'm going to start napping. You know, I've started this whole new thing about going to go for a nap after lunch. I'm starting to sound
very Italian of you, Rosella.
Yeah, but I think with the world, I think everyone needed to slow down a bit, you know, and just reestablish a slower rhythm.
Yeah,
and it shows. A lot of people who I speak to, they feel it, like they feel that much calmer.
Yes.
I don't think we would be in this situation if it wasn't what we all needed at the same time, you know what I mean? Like, I'd like to believe that we're sort of, there's a sort of greater reason, you know, and I think a lot of people are coming, I mean, in different ways, but I think a lot of people are, to some extent, coming to that realization.
Definitely.
So, yeah.
We have a few minutes left. There is a question from to all of the speakers, which is essentially, what are your top 3 essentials during this time? Don't know if anyone wants to kick that off, or maybe have a think, but sort of what are the 3 must-haves? I mean, I know we're talking about resourcefulness and how it impacts creativity. So moving on from that, what are the 3 things you absolutely, you know, no matter how resourceful you have to become in a situation like what we're living through at the moment, what are the 3 things you definitely have to have, regardless?
Objects or like abstract
Anything.
things too. Okay.
Both.
I think for me, definitely my journal has been sort of being able to kind of, I always find it a really useful tool, but I think particularly for me that over the past month, with all the changes, with all the kind of one crisis to the next, it's been a real sort of amazing outlet. Like maybe going for a run might have been if I could do that, but I can't, and it kind of gives me the same sense of like offloading. So that has definitely been an essential thing that I'm always grateful to have. Yeah, 3 things. Can I say the kitchen?
I guess, yeah.
You just did.
I just did. I suppose for me that, you know, it's my sort of, I guess, where I can express myself to some extent creatively. So it's whether it's that, or it means something else to somebody else, you know, another kind of tool or space, even if it's doesn't need to be utilized all the time. Like, it's not necessarily about being overly creative or productive. It's nice to have it there, you know, to have a little bit of a distraction, as much as it is nice to have the time to be still and to just think. Anybody else?
I'd second the journal. I think it's always good just to jot down ideas and observations or something that, you know, you'll forget in a few hours, things like that. Well, I feel like I've gone back to books now a bit more. I'm doing more reading, so I think those are always a good thing to have during a time like during resourcefulness. Because I think nowadays, like, it's so easy to get distracted with our phones and technology and things like that and spend all time on them, that like it's nice to have something like a book which you can shift towards, I think.
Absolutely.
What else?
Eliza, do you have anything to add to that, or?
I don't think that I would say 3 essentials, but perhaps if I can say what this period is bringing to me. One is this sensation of hiding, which is really cool, because especially in our job where we feel like we're constantly chased by clients and projects, feeling that everybody is kind of in this phase where they're asleep, or at least they're not bothering you with emails and messages constantly. Be it suppliers or clients or contractors or whoever, means that you can sort of get up to par with the projects that have been dragging behind. And so you have a bit of less of this sense of anxiety and constant like, oh my God, I have to finish this. And oh my God, I have to, you know, talk to this, and I have to, you know, there's a bit more calm, and it's really nice. So I know this is very cheeky and selfish probably, but every week I say like, oh, please, one more week so that I can finish what I have to do. And then, you know, I'm ready. And then I think, as we said, having this extra time and minimizing all the extra noise that we have in our lives and that we got so accustomed to. I'm not much of a writing person. I'm more of a thinking person. So this period helped me to reevaluate a lot of things. So it's just like sitting back and saying like, okay, now this makes me understand that saving for the rainy day is really important. And I think it might make a difference between people that are in panic mode and the ones that might not be. It made me think about like how lucky I am that I can, you know, sit at my home and work. And some people really are in panic mode because they live check to check. So, you know, it's like not everybody can save. But if you can, that's a good idea because you never know what happens. Even the most unexpected thing, such as this, which then hit the whole world, is something that really affects you. And, you know, as months go by, you start thinking like, what if, you know, these clients don't come, and then now all of my like, please don't call, please, you know, no more messages. Then you start panicking because you're not getting any more calls and no more messages for new projects. And just rethinking, you know, how much time you dedicate to work, and is it too much, and should you spend a bit more time doing things for yourself, or just going out for a walk. And you know, when things are taken away from you, you appreciate them so much more. So now going out and seeing all these people that are walking, and I'm thinking like, were all these people walking before?
I know, I noticed that as well.
so many people walk, you know, and it's just like everybody seems so much more relaxed. And I'm like, my God, we're in this parallel universe where everybody's happy air and relaxed, and there are the noises of traffic and no fireworks and no, you know, it's just like, the air is I don't know.
Unfortunately,
it's really sad because obviously there's something really bad going on at the same time, but it's
I think any situation has a polarity. I mean, not to sort of undercut the negative situations that are being lived in at the same time. But I mean, there's always in any situation, there's always polarities. There's always a positive and a negative, and hardship and ease. So it's like for some people, I think some are sort of not wanting to say that everything is going okay because they almost feel guilty to admit that, you know, they're not having these breakdowns and things are okay-ish, just because there are some people that are having a really tough time. But this goes in any situation, not just in a pandemic, generally. But no, and I like what you said, Eliza, about all these walkers out. I've noticed that. I went out for a walk on Sunday and I said, wow, there are a lot of people out in the 3 cities that I never noticed before. It used to be like no one on the waterfront, and all of a sudden...
And you can't even like social distance yourself when you go out for a walk. There's too many people around.
I know, and bicycles as well. Everyone seems to have invested in a whole cycling gear.
Julia, you'll see what we mean in about a week.
This is all news to me because I haven't been outside.
What are you talking about? Am I in Malta, or is this a whole different country that I've landed in?
Exactly.
You weren't.
I can still hear the cacciaturi, that's for sure. But
yeah, well, that conversation, we could spend another 3 hours.
Story. I have to say, though, in defense of technology, being on the other side of the world and being able to FaceTime, WhatsApp call, family every day was pretty amazing. Especially that I could do it with my 92-year-old Nannu, who I hadn't even heard because I never called him because time difference and the cost of the call and whatever. But to FaceTime, that was a pretty amazing experience.
Well, I think technology is getting a huge thumbs up in general. I mean, look at us, we're having this conversation here. I mean, how many webinars did we ever have, Carla, in the 3 years that we've run this? Like, these are like, we've never had so many webinars in the history of MCC. I mean, this is like, we're on a roll.
What webinar before this?
How do you know what it meant? I was like, a webinar what?
Or Zoom.
Now that everyone has like gotten used to teleworking, I think the government should put in some incentives to cut down on traffic and like make people telework from home like twice a week or something.
I'm sure people will though, because it's now
cheaper.
a new routine, and especially people who haven't stopped working and are still working pretty full hours and getting used to this. This is a new norm for them. So I don't think it will totally go back to full days in the office. When maybe people have even invested in technology to be able to work from home. We'll see, but I'm sure there's
maybe the sort of smaller startups who, you know, whose sort of office rent or whatever might have been a massive cost. If they're managing to make it work now with everyone at home, that's a huge money saver, I suppose.
Well, and the fridge is very conveniently located as well from all desks. So yes. Okay, well, if anyone else has any questions in general, feel free to add them here now. Otherwise, if any of you ladies want to add anything before we go off, just want to say a big thanks to everyone who's sort of contributed to this conversation today. I hope everyone who listened in enjoyed it. We finally managed to get Facebook streaming, so this is like third time lucky. Finally we managed. And so this will be up on the Facebook page and also on the YouTube channel, which we've launched, which will have a recording of this conversation for those who didn't manage to tune in. And pretty much that's it. So big thanks to everyone. Have a great evening, and we'll speak soon, and stay tuned for hopefully another episode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Speak soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.